Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. What is coming upon the world in 2023 is going to be devastating in both its size, its scope, its global reach, and particularly in regard to what the political response to it is going to be. So what am I talking about? Well, when we came into this year, what did I say was the most likely event we would see? A global depression, and the second most likely event, a financial crisis, a global financial crisis. And I believe we are on the cusp of that. The data points we're going to look at today verify that. So let's start out with this one right here. This is from the Economic Collapse blog by Michael Snyder. I ran across this headline, and it says, "We just witnessed an economic sign that hasn't happened since the peak of the Great Depression in 1932. So when I saw that, I thought, well, let me click on this and read it because I know exactly what he's talking about, because I've seen that metric and it hasn't happened since 1932. And then as I started reading it, I went, oh, no. Unfortunately, this is a totally different metric from the one that I was going to refer to. So now we have two data points that we're going to look at today that are the worst since the Great Depression, and one that is really unprecedented in terms of the United States of America that we're going to review. We're going to look at some quick headlines that I think show us exactly where we're headed, and we are headed to a deep, deep global depression, in my opinion. I hope I am wrong, but let's read on and see what he has to say. He says, economic conditions are much worse than you're being told. Throughout the past year, prices have been rising much faster than most of our incomes have. As a result, our standard of living has been rapidly declining. It has become increasingly difficult for U.S. households to make it from month to month, and as you will see below, more than a third of all U.S. adults are actually relying on their parents to pay at least some of their bills at this point. But even more alarming is what has been happening to real disposable income. So that means your income accounting for inflation. It says, according to Fox Business, the most recent GDP report revealed that the decline in real disposable income that we witnessed in 2022 was the largest that has been measured since 1932. This article says the most troubling information in the GDP report is the precipitous drop in real disposable income, which fell over $1 trillion in 2022. For context, this is the second largest percentage drop in real disposable income ever, behind only 1932, the worst year of the Great Depression. And Michael Snyder says, just think about that for a moment. The last time real disposable income declined this quickly was literally during the peak of the Great Depression. So again, we're not talking about incomes, but your income in terms of dollars might have gone up, but the purchasing power of those dollars have gone down much faster, or you've lost purchasing power much faster on average than incomes have gone up, which means people's ability to buy things has gone down the most year over year since the Great Depression. So I read that and I thought, wow, this is a data point that verifies what we've been talking about. And again, there's another such data point, and this one is what I thought that I was going to be looking at when I clicked on his article. And what I want to refer to, we want to go back to the St. Louis Fed, the Federal Reserve, their data. This is official government data we're looking at. And this is M2 money supply. So, we can get into all the nuts and bolts of what M1 money supply is, what M2 money supply is. I'm going to link an article in the description as well as in the comments, pin it to the top of the comments if you want to read exactly what that is. Just think cash in circulation and demand deposits. Essentially, that's what M2 is measuring. So how much cash is in your bank account, how much cash is out and about in the world circulating in the economy. And so when we look at this chart here, this goes back to 1959, we see the steady increase in M2 money supply. So if we call this the money supply, then when you have an increasing money supply, you have, by definition, inflation. You have an inflating money supply, and it takes more of those currency units to purchase something that you would want, which is why we've seen inflation ever since Nixon closed the gold window back in 1971. It's pretty much been straight up. There's been a few little blips here and there. And then we have this huge surge following all of the response and lockdown responses, stimulus checks, all of the, you don't have to pay your rent, you don't have to pay your mortgage, you don't have to pay your student loans, we're going to send you checks. All of those things really amazingly increased the amount of M2 that was available in the system. The money supply, well, most of that stuff has come to an end. Some is still out there. And then we have the Federal Reserve buying back some of the securities they went out in the marketplace and bought during the panic of March and April 2020. And so we see this movement down. And again, it looks like this little blip. And you think, what's the big deal with this blip? But again, let's take a look at this chart, not in terms of just the raw data, but what is the percentage change year over year? And when we look at it that way, we get this chart right here. And this shows this huge ramp up following that pandemic response. And then it's going straight down and is still on its way. We see an actual contraction in the M2 money supply and official government data for December 2022, that's the latest available, of negative 1.31%. So, okay, who cares? Why does that matter? Because, well, if you have an increase in the money supply, and that's called inflation, what would you call it when you have a decrease in the money supply? You call that deflation. And if you've studied the Great Depression, you know that it was a deflationary spiral that economists fear. This is their arch nemesis, is the evil deflationary spiral. If we cut over here, we see the headline that I thought that I was going to be reading when I clicked on that Michael Snyder article. This one is from Mike Shedlock, his blog Mish Talk. It says, the biggest collapse in M2 money supply since the Great Depression. If your measure of inflation is money supply, which it should be, it says then the economy is in a deflationary period right now. And again, he goes on and describes and gives some definitions of what M1 consists of, what M2 consists of. I'll link this article in the description in the comments so you can go read that. We're not going to read that right now. But go down and we get to this point where he says, not since 1932. And he has this tweet here from Cullen Roche. It says, incredible collapse in M2 money supply growth. People were very concerned this would cause hyperinflation back in 2020 when they were seeing this explode upward. But now we're seeing it collapse, which again is what I've been saying. We're going to have hyperinflation, but not until we see this collapse that we're seeing right now, this deflationary spiral, this deflationary collapse. And then Jim Bianco, he rings in with his own chart. We blow that up and we get this. Now I have to question some of the data here. He has 0.0 for the month of January. And we just read the latest official government data, which was only for December. It had a negative 1.31% drop. And I would assume that's because when I saw I was like, well, the biggest what since 1932? Because on that blog, they don't actually spell it out. But if we look at this chart, we can get an idea because this is the first time, according to this chart, that we've seen a year-over-year decline and assuming this is a year-over-year percentage change of negative M2 growth going all the way back to the Great Depression in 1938. So if this data point was wrong, maybe this one was slightly off, maybe it was there, and so maybe the previous article was referring to May 1932, this area. I'm not sure. But either way, what this tells us is this is the first time we've seen this happen since the Great Depression. We've seen a contraction in M2 money supply in the United States. First time since the Great Depression. And so that should tell us the times in which we're living right now. Now, what else are we seeing out there? I want to review another point for people who have missed it. And again, this is an update for those of you who have seen this. We're going to look here again at the official economic data for the federal funds effective rate. So when we hear that the Federal Reserve is raising rates, this is essentially what they're talking about. They're talking about they raise rates a quarter of a point, half a point, etc. That impacts all of the interest rates that are charged throughout the economy. But here we see the history of these rates going back to the 1950s. And again, guys, they have data, just like in the previous chart, that goes back before then, but they don't want to show us that data. Because if they do show us that data, they used to show that data and they took it away. But they know if we can look back at it, we'd say, we didn't used to have these problems until there was a Federal Reserve. And then we had a Great Depression, and we've had all these wild swings in the economy ever since. And we've had inflation ever since, because we've had central planners ever since. But here we see, this uptick in rates to 4.33 as of January 1st. Now, okay, again, what's the big deal? We've certainly had higher rates in the past. It didn't cause any sort of calamity. But when we look at the year-over-year percentage change in the federal funds effective rate, we get this chart. And this, guys, is absolutely unprecedented. This didn't happen during the Great Depression or any other time in American history that I'm aware of. Maybe following the American Revolution, you might have seen the collapse of the Continental or something like that, or the collapse of the Confederacy, the Confederate currency did something like this. But this is absolutely unprecedented. Previously, you go back to the 1950s, 410% is the highest year-over-year change in the federal funds effective rate prior to now. And yet, here we are now at 5,312% year-over-year change. And today, which is not reflected in this data, they hiked rates another quarter of a point, which means when the new data comes out, this is going to be even higher. So we're not done yet. And then they have a meeting in March where they're expected to hike again. And at that point, we may actually see it start to turn downward, because the first hike occurred in March 2022. So once we get past that point, the year-over-year comparisons won't be as absurd as they are right here. But nevertheless, the damage has been done, guys. Economists will tell you that these rate hikes take approximately 9 months to start working their way through the economy. And so what we're seeing right now is the effects from what was put in place by May 1st of 2022. So most of the spike is not reflected in that. And what this shows me is, this is a brick wall for the economy that the economy is slamming into. Or you may hear them talk about in the media the soft landing. The Fed is going to engineer the soft landing. Of course, they tell us there's no recession. So I'm not sure what we're supposed to be having a soft landing over if there's no recession. But this is flying the plane into the mountainside. Here's the mountain right here. They're flying it into that. Guys, if you were to fall off of a 20-story building, the fall won't hurt you at all. It's the sudden stop when you hit the ground that's going to cause the damage. And here, it's not that the Fed funds rate has gone up 4 percentage points. It's that it's done so quickly from such a small base in an unprecedented way. And this is going to have devastating consequences for the entire economy. There's something like $3 trillion in corporate debt in the United States that needs to roll over in the next 3 years, $1 trillion a year. And a lot of that corporate debt was financed a couple of years ago at these super low rates, and now it's going to be going up. What sort of impact is that going to have? When you have mortgage rates that a year ago were less than 3%, and now they're 6-7%. What does that do to the housing market? What does that do to all the industries that are associated with that? The auto market, when you see auto loan rates skyrocket, what does that do to that? When interest on people's credit cards goes up and they're paying more of their lowering disposable income, as we read in the first article, real disposable income's gone down, and you're taking more of that and putting it toward interest payments. What does that do for the economy? Well, we're getting a glimpse if we just look at some of the headlines that are out there. I'm just going to look at some of these from Zero Hedge probably over the last week. We've got global smartphone shipments plunge most on record. So, fourth quarter global smartphone shipments plunged 18.3% year over year. That's in the fourth quarter when we have Christmas. I would expect that they would be elevated, not dropping 18%, but that's what happened. We have start of bankruptcy wave, large firm filings surge to 2010 levels. So the most large bankruptcies we've seen at the start of the year since 2010, when we were, coming out of the great financial crisis. What about Chicago? PMI suffers longest contraction streak since Lehman. What was Lehman? Lehman was the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008. Pretty much the pivotal event, the one that everyone remembers from the great financial crisis. Or how about recession on its way? Dallas Fed shows factory activity slumps for 9th straight month. So guys, have no doubt about it. The data is telling us that we're heading into a major economic depression. I don't know how else to put it. This is bigger than your run-of-the-mill recession or correction. Based on what we've seen, these are extreme data points. When you're having multiple data points saying this is the worst since the Great Depression, when you're seeing one data point that's saying this is the worst of all time, it's never been like this before. This is pointing to something is going to break. They're going to keep hiking these rates into one of the most overvalued stock markets in history, into a real estate bubble, and they're going to crash all of these things at the same time that the dollar is under assault by the BRICS nations. This is debt is at all-time highs, not just consumer debt, corporate debt, and national debt. Countries all over the world are carrying massive historical amounts of debt, and what can't be paid back won't be paid back. So we're heading into, well, I have to be careful what I say here, but I would say a great monetary reset is right ahead of us. And so how is this all going to play out? We've talked about this before. There would be a depression, and I think we're seeing that in the data right now. There's going to be a severe depression, I think as bad as the Great Depression. However, not as long in duration as the Great Depression. 6 months, 18 months, I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be very long, because I think the political reaction to this, when millions of people are losing their jobs and we see panic set in among the political class over what's happening and people taking to the streets and we see the social unrest, is they're going to do a total course reversal. We're going to see the interest rates go back down. We're going to see them seeking the inflation rather than trying to eliminate the so-called transitory inflation. That transitory inflation will come back. They'll increase that money supply. They'll print currency and hand it out. They'll hand it out all over the place. They'll drop it from the skies in order to buy votes. Oh, it's terrible. People can't pay their rent, or they can't pay their mortgage, or they can't buy food, or they can't buy gas. Here's a check for you, and a check for you, and a check for you. And what are they going to do in that case? They're going to say, well, if you only signed up for the central bank digital currency, well, you can claim your money faster. It's waiting there in your account. Just go claim it. So on the other side of this, we're going to see massive inflation, perhaps even hyperinflation, but we're also going to see central bank digital currencies, and we're going to see that cage open up and the world walk right into it. And all of that sets the stage for the rise of the Antichrist. In the end times, it sets the stage for the rollout of the mark of the beast, because central bank digital currencies will create, well, the same platform with the same functions as the mark of the beast. They won't be the mark of the beast. That won't come until the midpoint of the tribulation. But the underlying technology that could be used will already be there waiting for the one who will use it. And we'll have a world that has been dealing with massive turmoil, massive chaos in their lives, who will be looking for someone who has the answers, someone who can stop all this volatility and bring back, well, we'll call it normal. That's what the world seeks out, but it's going to be anything but normal. Jesus says it's going to be a time of greater anguish than has ever been since nations came into existence. So that's what we're facing, guys, as we're looking at this. I think we're looking right into what is going to set the stage for many of these events that we read about in the Bible. Now, yesterday, I appeared on Serpents and Doves with Pablo. If you didn't get a chance to see that live, head on over there and check it out. Again, I'll put a link to this in the description as well as pin it to the top of the comments. But we talked about a lot of these topics as well, so you'll want to go over there and check that out if you didn't get a chance to see it. And one of the people during the Q&A part asked a question about how do you know what news sources to trust? Where do you go to get reliable news? And my belief is you need to start and end with the Bible. The Bible needs to be your rock that you rely on. Read your Bible, know your Bible. Then everything you see, read, and hear, make sure to filter that through God's Word in order to find truth. Use the mind He gave you, the wisdom He gave you, the guidance of the Holy Spirit to figure these things out. But also look for news outlets that have proven themselves worthy in the past by telling you what was going to happen before it happened, or telling you the truth rather than feeding you propaganda. If you've run across places where they're feeding you propaganda, don't trust those news sources anymore. And I bring this up because that's what we're seeing now. When we look at the data we just looked at that's telling us we're heading into the worst economic period since the Great Depression, yet you can read all sorts of news stories saying everything's wonderful, everything's great. We're going to have a soft landing from the recession that isn't happening. Everybody's happy. There's no problems. I don't know what you're talking about, these grocery store prices. Everything's good. You don't even need news stories to tell you what reality is. Just look around. Go to the local gas station. Go to the local grocery store. Look at the prices there. Talk to your friends. Look at your own budget and how much you spent a year ago on the basic necessities of life, how much you spend now. and how much you earn now versus what you earned then, are you doing better than you were a year ago? Or are you doing worse? Common sense tells me if I open my eyes and I look around, doesn't matter what the media is telling me, this is not good. This is going to be devastating on a global scale, and I believe is going to send us central bank digital currencies and eventually the Antichrist and a global empire that he rules over. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what you think. Maybe you think all of this data is good. If you think this is good data, leave your comments below. I welcome all comments. Let me know what you think. Make sure to like and share this. God willing, I'll see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.